Hi, welcome to the small shed. This week on the Cyclekart I'm back on the front end of it. See you in a minute. Now, to be more specific, I'm looking at the front suspension and steering sort of work. A bit more thinking, a bit more plotting and planning gone on in this last week, and a little bit of refurbishment on bits as well. So let's just dive straight in and have a look at what we've been up to. Right, another day, another delivery, and hopefully this is something that will get me a whole lot closer in a couple of areas. In particular the front end. I'm hoping this will help me start to resolve some of the areas around the front suspension and front axle, and I've been waiting for it for a couple of weeks now. It's from Cyclekart. The long bit sticking out is, I assume, my back axle. That is something I don't think I need at the moment, but while I was on an ordering spree I thought I'd get one, and I think I've got a pair of rear axle mounts bearings that are a bit more substantial than the ones I've got off eBay. I wasn't convinced that they were strong enough to cope with the strains of in the back of the Cyclekart. These are they were a cast alloy for this bracket and I wasn't convinced that they were strong enough. This is much stronger. So those are the bearers for the axle. There we go. So 25mm axle with keyway, piece of steel for the keyway, two bearings, and some other bits. Let's just lose all the packing. Looks like I'll be needing another trip up the tip in the next day or two with all the stuff that's coming out. Bolts, which are kingpin bolts I think. But this is the main event, which is what I'm trying to get sorted. It's a set of top hat bearings, bushes for the front kingpins, and these are the front wheel bearings. Now that should be, yes, that's got the 16-degree kingpin inclination on it. Now what that gives me is a diameter for my whatever I'm mounting the end on the end of the front axle. That will enable that bush to go into there, so we can sort that out. So what happens is that is at about 16 degrees. The wheels are on the ground, square with the ground, and that kingpin points down to where that wheel will have a contact patch at the bottom. What it means is that that connection there is on a slight angle, so I've got to cope with that, some sort of rose joint on the end to the steering. But that is that, and that's really why I needed these, to establish the distance from the wheel itself to about here, which is where the axle will end, because I wasn't sure what that length would be, and therefore I couldn't get the front axle beam sorted as a result. I think I've ordered 70mm long here, which is slightly longer than I need with the proper Honda wheels or clones of the Honda wheels, but it gave me a bit of, yeah, that's 70mm. That gave me a little bit of room with the spacer to either move the wheel in or out to suit how I was to get the last few bits of width right. It gave me a sort of a 10mm or so of messing around. So the end of my axle mount has to come in on something at that 16-degree angle there, like that. So we'll get the drawing and see how this looks on those. So I've put the kingpins in and the bushes on to the axle stubs, lined those all up. That all works quite nicely. That gives me the length then of the axle between these bushes. Got the spring on. That's shown me that I probably need to extend my hanger length slightly. It's probably slightly lower than I thought it would be. So I can perfect that and sort that out and sort out the shackles that I need for that. What I need to do now is to actually establish effectively a block at the end of each end of the axle, which will house these kingpins and also give me something to fix the radius rods that fix back to the chassis, that stop the whole axle moving from front to back on opposite sides willy-nilly without any sort of restraint. It needs something to restrain it. What I think I'm going to do is get some timber, blocker timber, and just effectively measure up and make something in wood as a dummy to get me a rough idea of what I think I need to do, and then possibly knock those out in aluminium, because I can work aluminium relatively easily. And once I've done that, then we can sort out a means of fixing them to the end of the axle, the front beam, and I can then get that made with mounting plates on the end with holes in it. And what that will hopefully give me is a block at each end housing the kingpin that will be vertical on its face where it fits to the beam. And it will mean that I can both bring it in and out to get me different camber angles on the front wheels by just shimming out with some washers perhaps on the mounting bolts, or the same front to back to refine the caster angle as well. I'll set that at probably somewhere around 5 degrees, but then I'll just have that little bit of room to manoeuvre and just finesse and play with it at a later stage just to see whether it makes a lot of difference or not, whether you can feel a lot of difference. So I'm just going to mark all this out now and cut it to size. We'll go on from there. So that's the sort of thing I've been looking at making. That's holding the kingpin sleeve and provides effectively a swivel point, but when you put that at the right sort of angles, that is vertical, so that would go at the end of the beam axle. One of the reasons it's worth doing this sort of thing is that the first thing it's taught me is that needs to be bigger. That needs to go out further that way, because I've got to restrain this part, top and bottom, with 2 radius rods that come out back to the chassis rail. and they come in at a sort of about a 45-degree-ish angle, something like that. But clearly when you start to turn the wheel, that would foul. So I need to bring that inboard a little bit so that I can get much greater turning circle on it. Don't know. I've been having to think about what to do with the ends of the axles and how I mount the stub axles onto the front beam. And so logically you would then just stick some sort of round thing on the end, weld a circular panel on the end of the axle, and then I can just bolt straight to it, and that will give me what I want. As is the way with these things, I had a bit of a brain spurt at about 3 o'clock in the morning one morning when I couldn't sleep, and I've come up with what I think is the answer, that the sizes of these things aren't necessarily right at the moment. What I've done with is I've come up with this, which is effectively a plate that will fix to the main swivel part here with I don't know what, probably M6 bolts countersunk that thread into the aluminium. That should be strong enough to hold that. And then a similar plate welded onto the end of the axle. So far so good. And that would be then set up to give me something that would bolt on, and again sizes, distances and that have all got to be sorted, but that will bolt onto the end of the axle, and then I'm sorted. But what it will allow me to do is later on, if I want to play with changing the caster slightly, all I need to do is take that plate off and bolt another one on with all those holes clocked by 1 or 2 degrees one way or the other. The other thing it will enable me to do is by taking that plate off and putting one on that's got 1 or 2 degrees of taper machined onto it, which I should be able to get done with aluminium on the router on a flat bed or something like that. That will mean I can actually build spacers that will have negative camber or positive camber. So it's worth staying awake at night some nights to come up with something that, again, I couldn't really quite visualize in my head. I find it much easier to be able to make something, mock something up in wood. So yeah, I think I'm getting somewhere now. I'll go away and get some more bits on order. As I say, I've already ordered the aluminium to get this part made. That's going to be probably the biggest, most complex job of the whole lot, really, because there's quite a bit of machining and stuff done on that is not something I'm going to be doing very easily in a home workshop, but we will, I'm sure we can do it. Aluminium works as well as hardwood, so it shouldn't be a problem, but now it's a bit like Christmas in the shed every day at the moment, with parts arriving mainly for front suspension stuff. I've had some rod ends arrive which we'll be using for the steering arms. I've ordered some 10mm plain rod which I'm going to tap the ends for, so that we can then put a tapped end on each rod. And then last but not least, and probably heaviest, is the part which I suspect is going to be the biggest build, or the hardest build of the whole thing. That is a solid block of aluminium, and that is to make the two axle supports at the end. That is designed basically to go in there and make that piece. Right, so I've marked out the aluminium billet. It's a diagonal cut to go across the middle. I've got 65mm from the top to the bottom of the Cyclekart's stub axle. And the next thing I need to do, as I say, I'll cut that off. What that effectively does is replace my little wooden block there with a chunk of aluminium that pulls that face further away from the spindle. I've just got to decide whether or not I'll need to cut the top part off, because that gives clearance for the top arm to go in there and swivel. But I'm just trying to check whether I need to bother cutting the bottom off. I don't think I do at the moment, so I might leave all of that in so that I can get better fixing lower down for the radius rods. But we'll see. I'll leave that to do later. At the moment what I'll do is drill the vertical holes with a pilot drill, fairly small, right the way through, and do that diagonal cut, and then I can start and work on the individual ends. I've got to round the ends off, put a half round on there, and take these pieces out. Front axle spring hangers, just going to take them apart now and drop them into something that will hopefully loosen all the sludge and dried up grease that's inside the shaft. There's a small hole on the side that you pump it grease through the middle and it comes out into the spring shackle. Pop those all into a pot, take off the grease nipples, pour in some, well, we'll try some isopropyl alcohol, leave it to soak in there for a bit. The nipple ends, this one looks particularly poorly, and although it might work, all the ends broken away. So I'm going to see if I can get some new ones. I don't know what size they are, but they're very small. But such is the power of the internet. Should be able to find out. I'll just get my calipers. I'm suffering from that problem you get when you've got two workshops on the go, in that whatever you want is always in the other one. Good excuse to go out and buy more things. It's a 5mm outside diameter on the thread, but I suspect, given the age of this, these are going to be imperial. But I can work backwards from that, I'm sure, and find out what the thread is. It looks like a fine thread, so all I've got to do is find out what that relates to in inches and work it backwards from that. But I'll drop those in as well, just to give them a chance, and we'll let them soak for a day or two. Now, I've done a bit of research on the internet, and the closest I can see that there is a size for a grease nipple is actually 2BA, and it happens I've got a BA tap. So I'm just going to have a look and see if that is what these are. It appears to be something which occurs on a BSA motorbike somewhere. But yeah, that's it. So that's solved that mystery. It's a 2BA tap for the grease nipple, so I can get some 2BA nipples and get new ones. That's good. Both of these shackles, when I've got down to cleaning them up, have got a bit of wear on them. Both sides, both there and here, where the shackles have been on them in the past. They're a little bit poorly, but they're not too bad, so I think I'll just live with it and keep an eye on them. Now, as a postscript to cleaning up these bits, a couple of days later the grease nipples have arrived, so we can just make sure that they are what we wanted. I've got I ended up buying 10, I think I had to buy them by the 10, but as I mentioned, I think, or will mention in the future, I'm possibly going to put similar ones in the kingpin as well. But yes, those go in. That's a 2BA. Not sure yet whether I'll need some sort of a copper washer or something to crush on the end, but that gives me a nice replacement for the originals that wear just a little bit seedy here and there, and I suspect although they might have worked, they were a little bit the worse for wear. You can see from the shape of them. Well, at least we've got a start made on cutting chunks of metal. Hope it was of interest. I look forward to seeing you next week, and we'll be hopefully doing something different on the Cyclekart. See you then. Bye!